In the rolling hills of Oregon Territory during the 1860s, where the frontier was still wild and the relationship between settlers and Native Americans hung in delicate balance, unfolds a story that will challenge everything you think you know about courage, honor, and the unexpected ways that one act of compassion can transform an entire community. This is the remarkable tale of Ezekiel "Zeke" Morrison, a humble wheat farmer who made a decision that defied convention and changed not only his own life, but the fate of two peoples learning to coexist. If you're ready for a story that will restore your faith in the power of human decency to bridge even the deepest divides, hit that like button and subscribe for more incredible tales of courage and unity. Don't forget to let us know in the comments which city you're watching from. We love connecting with our global community. The Oregon sun was setting behind the Cascade Mountains when Ezekiel Morrison first heard the sounds that would alter his quiet life forever. It was late September 1864, and the 34-year-old farmer had been working since dawn to bring in the last of his harvest before the autumn rains threatened the crop that represented his entire livelihood. Zeke had been farming his 160-acre homestead in the Willamette Valley for 8 years, ever since the death of his wife Martha had left him seeking solitude in the demanding rhythms of agricultural life. The land had been good to him, yielding abundant harvests that he sold to growing settlements throughout Oregon Territory, and his modest farmhouse had become a comfortable refuge where he could live quietly with his grief and memories. But the sounds that reached his ears as he loaded the last wagon of grain were anything but peaceful. From the dense forest that bordered his eastern property came the unmistakable sounds of conflict, shouting voices, breaking branches, and someone crying out in pain. Every frontier instinct told Zeke to stay away from whatever trouble was unfolding in those woods, to mind his own business and avoid getting entangled in disputes that could cost a man his life. The relationship between white settlers and native tribes had been tense for years, marked by misunderstandings, broken treaties, and occasional violence. Most of Zeke's neighbors viewed all Indians with suspicion, and the general consensus was that the safest policy was to avoid contact whenever possible and respond to any perceived threat with overwhelming force. But as Zeke listened to the sounds of distress coming from the forest, he found himself thinking not about potential dangers, but about the human suffering those cries represented. Somewhere in those woods, someone was badly hurt and possibly dying, and the basic decency his mother had instilled in him would not allow him to ignore another person's need for help, regardless of race or circumstances. Grabbing his medical kit, a collection of bandages, laudanum, and folk remedies assembled over years of treating injured livestock and farm accidents, Zeke made his way carefully through the underbrush toward the source of the disturbance. The sounds had grown quieter, but he could still hear labored breathing and occasional moans coming from a clearing about a quarter-mile into the forest. What he found when he pushed through the last screen of bushes was a scene burned into his memory forever. In the center of a small clearing, a Native American man of perhaps 50 years lay unconscious beneath a massive fallen tree that had clearly trapped him during a terrible accident. The man was dressed in traditional tribal clothing, buckskin pants and shirt decorated with intricate beadwork, and his long black hair was streaked with silver, suggesting both age and wisdom. The obvious severity of his injuries galvanized Zeke into immediate action. The fallen tree had pinned the man's left leg, and from the unnatural angle, Zeke could see that the bone was almost certainly broken. Blood seeped from a deep gash on his forehead, and his breathing was shallow and irregular, suggesting possible internal injuries from the crushing weight. Zeke quickly assessed the situation with the practical eye of a man who had spent years dealing with farm emergencies. The tree was too heavy for one man to lift, but he might be able to use leverage with a long branch to raise it enough to drag the injured man free. Time was of the essence. The man's pulse was weak and thready, and the amount of blood loss suggested that every minute could be the difference between life and death. Working with desperate efficiency, Zeke found a sturdy branch for a lever and a large rock for a fulcrum. Sweat poured down his face as he strained against the makeshift lever, gradually lifting the crushing weight inch by precious inch until there was just enough space to pull the unconscious man to safety. The man was heavier than expected, and the dead weight of his unconscious body made the rescue even more difficult. But finally, after what felt like hours, but had probably been only minutes, Zeke managed to drag him clear of the fallen tree and begin assessing the full extent of his injuries. The broken leg was the most obvious problem, but there were also deep cuts on his arms and chest, and the head wound was bleeding freely. Using every bit of medical knowledge acquired through years of treating injured animals and farm accidents, Zeke began stabilizing his patient. He cleaned and bandaged the head wound, fashioned a crude splint for the broken leg using branches and strips torn from his own shirt, and administered a small dose of laudanum to help manage what must have been excruciating pain. Throughout the entire process, the man remained unconscious, his breathing growing gradually stronger as immediate threats to his life were addressed. As Zeke worked, he became increasingly aware that this was no ordinary member of the local tribes. The quality of the man's clothing, the intricate silver jewelry he wore, and the elaborate beadwork all suggested someone of considerable importance. More telling was the eagle feather woven into his hair, a symbol indicating a man of great honor and leadership among the native peoples. The realization that he might be treating a tribal chief added new complexity to an already challenging situation. If this man died despite Zeke's efforts, his death could easily be blamed on the white farmer who found him. But if he survived, his rescue by a white settler might help bridge some of the mistrust that had poisoned relations between the two communities. As darkness settled over the forest, Zeke faced a critical decision. The injured man was stable for the moment, but he clearly needed more medical attention than Zeke could provide. The nearest doctor was in Albany, more than 20 miles away, but the journey over rough terrain could easily kill a man with such serious injuries. Leaving him in the forest overnight could be equally fatal. After careful consideration, Zeke decided to transport the injured man to his own farmhouse, where he could provide shelter, warmth, and whatever medical care was possible while monitoring his condition through the critical first night. Using blankets from his wagon, he created a makeshift stretcher and began the slow, careful journey back through the forest to his home. The farmhouse Zeke had built was modest but comfortable, with a large main room that served as kitchen and sitting area and 2 smaller bedrooms. He settled his patient in the spare bedroom, building up the fire to ensure warmth throughout the night. He prepared hot broth from garden vegetables and managed to get small amounts of liquid into the unconscious man, knowing that maintaining his strength would be crucial for recovery. Throughout that long night, Zeke maintained a vigil beside his patient's bed, checking pulse and breathing, changing bandages when necessary, and administering small doses of laudanum when signs of returning consciousness suggested pain was becoming a problem. It was exhausting work, made more challenging by constant worry that his efforts might not be enough to save a life that had been placed unexpectedly in his hands. But as dawn broke over the Willamette Valley, painting the wheat fields in soft morning light, Zeke was rewarded by the sight of his patient's eyes opening for the first time since the rescue. The man's gaze was confused at first, but as his vision cleared and he took in his surroundings, his expression changed to one of alert intelligence mixed with cautious gratitude. "You are the one who saved me," the man said in accented but perfectly clear English, his voice weak but steady. "I remember the tree falling and then nothing until now. But I am alive and I am in your home, so you must have pulled me from beneath the weight that should have crushed me to death." Zeke nodded, feeling profound relief that his patient was not only conscious, but apparently lucid and capable of communication. "I found you in the forest yesterday evening. You were badly hurt, but I think you're going to recover if you rest and let your body heal." The man studied Zeke's face with a penetrating gaze that seemed to look directly into his soul. "I am called Many Eagles, and I am the chief of the Confederated Tribes of the Willamette Valley. You have saved the life of one who leads his people, though you could not have known this when you made the choice to help a stranger in need." The confirmation that he had indeed rescued a tribal chief sent a chill of both pride and apprehension through Zeke's body. Pride because he had apparently succeeded in saving the life of a man whose death could have had serious consequences for relations between whites and Indians throughout the region. Apprehension because he was now responsible for the safety and care of someone whose presence in his home could easily be misunderstood by his neighbors. "Chief Many Eagles," Zeke said carefully, "I'm honored to help you, but I think you should know that some of my neighbors might not understand why you're here. There's been tension between our peoples, and they might see your presence as a threat rather than understanding that you're here because you need medical care." Many Eagles nodded slowly, clearly understanding the complexity of the situation. "This is why what you have done is so important, Ezekiel Morrison. You have shown that it is possible for our peoples to help each other instead of living in fear and mistrust. You did not ask about my tribe or my position when you found me injured. You saw only a man who needed help, and you risked your own safety to provide it." The fact that the chief knew his name was startling until Zeke realized that the native peoples probably kept careful track of all white settlers in their traditional territory, learning their names and observing their behavior as a matter of survival and diplomacy. "I did what anyone would do," Zeke replied, though even as he said the words, he knew they weren't entirely true. Many of his neighbors would have left an injured Indian in the forest rather than risk getting involved in tribal affairs. "No," Many Eagles said with quiet certainty, "you did what a man of honor does. And among my people, such actions create obligations that extend far beyond the immediate moment. You have saved my life, Ezekiel Morrison, and my people will remember this debt for as long as the rivers flow and the mountains stand. The gift that defied understanding." 3 days had passed since Zeke had discovered Many Eagles trapped beneath the fallen tree, and the chief's recovery had progressed better than either man had dared to hope. The head wound was healing cleanly. The broken leg was properly set and showing no signs of infection, and Many Eagles' strength was returning steadily with rest, proper nutrition, and careful medical attention. But it was on the morning of the 4th day that Zeke received the surprise that would challenge everything he thought he understood about tribal customs, gratitude, and the complex social structures of the native peoples who had called Oregon home for countless generations. Zeke was in the barn, milking his cow and attending to daily chores, when he heard the sound of approaching horses. Through the open barn door, he could see a small group of riders making their way down the lane to his farmhouse, and his first instinct was to worry that news of Many Eagles' presence had spread, and that trouble was coming in the form of concerned neighbors or territorial authorities. But as the riders drew closer, Zeke realized that these were not white settlers, but Native Americans. 5 women mounted on fine horses and dressed in elaborate traditional clothing that suggested this was a formal delegation rather than a casual visit. They rode with confident bearing, and their approach had the ceremonial quality of an important tribal ritual being conducted according to ancient customs. Zeke emerged from the barn and walked toward the house, uncertain about the proper way to greet such visitors, but determined to show respect for what was clearly a significant occasion. Many Eagles, despite his injuries, had managed to position himself on the porch where he could observe the proceedings, and his expression suggested that he had been expecting this visit and understood its significance. The 5 women dismounted with fluid grace and approached the farmhouse in a formal procession, with the eldest woman taking the lead and the others following at respectful distances that reflected some kind of hierarchical arrangement. They were all dressed in beautifully crafted traditional clothing, elaborately beaded buckskin dresses, intricate silver jewelry, and ceremonial ornaments that spoke of considerable skill and significant status within their community. The leader was a woman of perhaps 45, with graying hair braided in an elaborate style and decorated with feathers and beads that caught the morning sunlight. Her bearing suggested both authority and wisdom, and when she spoke, it was with the formal dignity that marked important tribal ceremonies and diplomatic occasions. "Ezekiel Morrison," she said in English that was precise and carefully pronounced, "I am Blue Sky Woman, sister to many eagles and keeper of the Women's Council of our people. We have come to honor the debt that our chief owes to you for saving his life when he lay trapped and dying in the forest." Zeke glanced at many eagles, who nodded encouragingly, clearly indicating that this was a significant honor rather than a complication to be worried about. "Ma'am, I appreciate your coming, but I don't consider that the chief owes me any debt. I did what anyone would do when they found someone who needed help." Blue Sky Woman smiled at his response, but it was the kind of smile that suggested she understood something about the situation that he did not. "Among our people, the saving of a life creates sacred obligations that cannot be dismissed or ignored. You have given our chief his life back, and according to our customs, we must offer something of equal value in return." "I don't need any payment," Zeke said quickly. "I'm just glad that the chief is recovering and that I was able to help." "This is not about payment," Blue Sky Woman replied with patient dignity. "This is about balance, about maintaining harmony between peoples and ensuring that acts of great kindness are honored in ways that strengthen bonds between communities. You have shown great courage and compassion, and our people wish to respond with a gift that reflects the magnitude of what you have done." The other four women had remained silent during this exchange, but now they stepped forward in unison, each carrying elaborately wrapped bundles that they placed on the ground in front of Zeke with ceremonial precision. The contents were hidden beneath beautifully woven blankets, but their size and weight suggested that whatever was being offered was substantial and carefully chosen. "These are the daughters and granddaughters of our tribe's most honored families," Blue Sky Woman explained as each woman was introduced in turn. "Mourning Dove, who is skilled in the healing arts and knows the medicinal properties of every plant that grows in our territory. Star Dancing, who can craft items of beauty and utility from leather, beads, and silver with skill that has made her work treasured throughout our region. Singing River, whose knowledge of crops and growing methods could help any farmer achieve harvests beyond his dreams. And Little Bear, who has wisdom in the management of livestock and can gentle the wildest horses and heal sick cattle with methods passed down through generations." As each woman was introduced, she stepped forward and offered a slight bow that was clearly part of the formal ceremony. Zeke found himself impressed by their dignity and the obvious respect they commanded within their community. But he was also increasingly puzzled about what exactly was being offered and why these particular women had been chosen. "I'm honored to meet you all," Zeke said carefully, "but I'm not sure I understand what's happening here or what you're offering me." Blue Sky Woman's expression grew more serious, and when she spoke, it was with the formality that suggested she was reciting carefully chosen words. "Ezekiel Morrison, you have saved the life of our chief, and by our customs, we must offer you a gift of equal value. The greatest gift our people can offer is the gift of family, of women who can bring skills, wisdom, and companionship to a man who has shown himself worthy of such trust." The implications began to dawn on Zeke, and he felt a mixture of panic and amazement as he realized that these 5 women were apparently being offered to him as potential wives, a gesture of gratitude so enormous and culturally complex that he had no idea how to respond appropriately. "Ma'am," he said carefully, aware that his next words could either honor or insult people who were clearly trying to show him great respect. "I'm deeply honored by your offer, but in my culture, a man typically chooses one wife, and the decision is based on mutual affection rather than family arrangements." Many eagles spoke for the first time since the ceremony had begun, his voice carrying authority but also warmth that suggested genuine friendship had developed between the two men. Ezekiel Morrison, my sister offers you a choice among these women, not an obligation to accept all of them. Each has skills and qualities that would make her a worthy partner for a man of honor, but the decision of whom to choose, or whether to choose at all, remains yours to make. Zeke looked at the 5 women, each of whom met his gaze with quiet dignity and obvious intelligence. They were all beautiful in their own ways, but more importantly, they clearly possessed the kind of practical skills and knowledge that would be invaluable to a man trying to build a successful farm in Frontier, Oregon. This is an incredible honor, Zeke said finally, but it's also an enormous decision that I can't make hastily. Would it be possible for me to take time to consider your offer and to get to know these remarkable women before making any commitments? Blue Sky Woman nodded approvingly, clearly pleased that he was taking the matter seriously rather than dismissing it outright. Wisdom requires careful consideration of important decisions. We will remain in the area for several days while our chief completes his recovery. During this time, you may speak with each of these women and learn about their skills and desires. If you choose to accept our gift, the marriage ceremony can be performed according to both our customs and yours. And as the formal ceremony concluded and the women began to unpack their bundles, revealing an incredible array of gifts that included beautifully crafted tools, elaborately decorated clothing, precious silver jewelry, and medicinal herbs, Zeke found himself overwhelmed by the generosity and complexity of what was being offered. The choice that united 2 worlds. The next morning dawned clear and crisp, with perfect autumn weather that made Oregon Territory feel like the promised land that had drawn thousands of settlers westward. Zeke had spent most of the night awake, wrestling with the magnitude of the decision he faced and trying to understand his own feelings about an offer that challenged every assumption he had made about his future. By the time the sun was fully up and daily chores demanded attention, Zeke had reached a conclusion that surprised him with its clarity. The night of contemplation had helped him realize that his hesitation was not really about whether to accept the gift, but about which of the 5 remarkable women he should choose as his partner in building bridges between 2 worlds. Each woman possessed qualities that would make her an ideal wife for a frontier farmer, but as Zeke reflected on their individual conversations from the previous day, he found himself drawn particularly to Mourning Dove, the healer whose combination of practical medical knowledge and gentle wisdom seemed to complement his own interests and temperament perfectly. Mourning Dove was perhaps 30 years old, with quiet beauty that came from inner peace and confidence rather than mere physical attractiveness. Her knowledge of traditional medicine was encyclopedic, but she was also eager to learn about medical practices that white settlers brought from the East, and she spoke with passion about combining the best of both worlds to create more effective treatments for frontier communities. More than her professional skills, it was Mourning Dove's character that had impressed Zeke during their conversations. She possessed serenity and strength that reminded him of Martha in some ways, but also an adventurous spirit that suggested she would embrace the challenges of building a cross-cultural marriage rather than simply enduring them. When Zeke approached Blue Sky Woman that morning to express his decision, he did so with nervous excitement that he hadn't felt since his courtship of Martha more than a decade earlier. The prospect of marriage had seemed impossible just days earlier, but the events set in motion by his rescue of many eagles had opened possibilities he had never imagined. "Blue Sky Woman," he said formally, "I've spent the night considering your generous offer, and I would be honored to ask for Mourning Dove's hand in marriage if she is willing to accept me as her husband." Blue Sky Woman's face lit up with genuine pleasure, and she nodded approvingly. "Mourning Dove is my youngest daughter, and she has spoken to me about her conversations with you yesterday. She believes that you are a man of honor who would treat her with respect and kindness, and she is eager to begin building a life that can serve as an example of cooperation between our peoples." The formal acceptance ceremony that followed was unlike anything Zeke had ever experienced, combining elements of tribal tradition with adaptations that would make the marriage legally recognized by territorial authorities. Many Eagles, despite his injuries, insisted on serving as the chief officiant, while Blue Sky Woman represented the bride's family and Zeke's nearest neighbor, Klaus Brenner, who had been summoned to serve as witness, represented the white settler community. Mourning Dove herself was radiant in an elaborately beaded wedding dress that had been crafted by Star Dancing specifically for the occasion, and she carried herself with quiet dignity of a woman who understood the historical significance of the step she was taking. This was not just a personal union, but a symbolic bridge between two communities that had too often viewed each other with suspicion and fear. The ceremony was conducted in both English and the tribal language, with translations provided to ensure that everyone present understood the vows being exchanged and the commitments being made. Many Eagles spoke about the sacred nature of marriage and the responsibility that both partners bore to honor not just each other, but the communities they represented. When it came time for Zeke and Mourning Dove to exchange vows, they chose to speak directly to each other rather than simply reciting traditional formulas, and their words reflected both the personal nature of their commitment and its larger significance. "Mourning Dove," Zeke said, taking her hands in his and looking directly into her eyes, "I promise to honor you not just as my wife, but as a teacher who can help me understand your people and your traditions. I promise to work with you to build a home where both our cultures are respected and where our children can learn the best of both worlds." Mourning Dove's response was equally heartfelt. "Ezekiel Morrison, I choose you as my husband because you have shown that it is possible for our peoples to help each other instead of living in fear. I promise to share my knowledge of healing and plant medicine to help you care for your farm and your community. I promise to learn your ways while teaching you mine, so that together we can build something new and beautiful." The exchange of rings followed tribal custom rather than white tradition, with elaborately crafted silver bands that had been blessed by tribal elders and decorated with symbols representing fertility, prosperity, and the unity of two peoples. Klaus Brenner, who had initially been skeptical about attending what he saw as an unusual ceremony, found himself moved by the obvious sincerity and deep meaning of the vows being exchanged. As the formal ceremony concluded and the celebration began, Zeke was struck by how naturally the two communities seemed to blend together when fear and suspicion were replaced by shared joy and common purpose. Klaus found himself in animated conversation with Star Dancing about weaving techniques, while Mourning Dove's sister Singing River was comparing notes with Zeke about crop rotation strategies. The feast that followed combined traditional tribal foods with dishes that reflected Zeke's farming background, creating a menu that symbolized the cultural fusion that the marriage represented. Wild salmon was served alongside roasted vegetables from Zeke's garden, and traditional tribal corn preparations were complemented by wheat bread baked from Zeke's own grain. A legacy of understanding. 2 years after that fateful September evening, when Zeke had heard cries for help coming from the forest, the Morrison farm had become something unprecedented in Oregon Territory, a thriving example of successful cooperation between white settlers and Native Americans that was attracting attention from territorial authorities, visiting dignitaries, and families from Bot, communities who were eager to learn from their example. The marriage between Zeke and Mourning Dove had proven to be everything that both communities had hoped for, and more. Their partnership had not only brought personal happiness to two people who had found love in unexpected circumstances, but had also created practical benefits that were transforming agricultural practices throughout the Willamette Valley. Mourning Dove's extensive knowledge of traditional plant medicine had revolutionized healthcare in the surrounding settlements. as she taught white settlers to use native plants for treating everything from minor injuries to serious illnesses that had previously required expensive visits to distant doctors. Her garden behind the farmhouse had become a living pharmacy where she cultivated medicinal herbs alongside the vegetables that fed their growing family. Zeke, meanwhile, had learned traditional farming techniques from his wife's people that had dramatically increased his crop yields while reducing the environmental impact of his agricultural practices. The combination of tribal knowledge about soil management, weather patterns, and crop rotation with white settlers' tools and livestock had created a farming operation that was both more productive and more sustainable than anything either community had achieved independently. But perhaps the most significant impact of their union was the way it had changed attitudes in both communities toward the possibility of peaceful coexistence. The success of their marriage had inspired other families to build relationships across cultural lines, and the Morrison farm had become an informal meeting ground where white settlers and tribal members could interact in an atmosphere of mutual respect and shared purpose. Chief Many Eagles, whose recovery had been complete and whose friendship with Zeke had deepened over the 2 years since his rescue, frequently visited the farm to participate in the informal councils that had developed to address issues affecting both communities. These gatherings had proven so effective at preventing misunderstandings and resolving conflicts that territorial authorities had begun consulting with the group on matters of regional policy. "What you and Mourning Dove have created here," Many Eagles told Zeke during one of these visits, "has shown both our peoples that we can be stronger together than we ever were apart. Your marriage has become a bridge that allows our communities to share knowledge, resources, and friendship instead of living in fear and suspicion." The most tangible evidence of this success was the birth of Zeke and Mourning Dove's son, little Thomas Many Eagles Morrison, who at 18 months old was already a symbol of hope for the future of relations between white settlers and Native Americans in Oregon Territory. Thomas was being raised bilingual, learning both English and his mother's tribal language, and his very existence represented the possibility of a generation that could navigate both cultures with equal comfort and understanding. Mourning Dove had proven to be not only a loving wife and devoted mother, but also a skilled diplomat who could help both communities understand each other's perspectives and find common ground for cooperation. Her gentle wisdom and practical knowledge had made her a trusted advisor to families from both communities who sought her counsel on matters ranging from medical treatment to conflict resolution. "Thomas will grow up understanding that he belongs to both peoples," Mourning Dove told Zeke as they watched their son playing in the garden with children from both white settler and tribal families who had come to visit. "He will never have to choose between two worlds because he will know that they are really one world shared by all of us." The success of their partnership had also brought material prosperity that benefited both communities. The Morrison farm was now one of the most productive in the territory, and the techniques that Zeke and Mourning Dove had developed were being adopted by other farmers throughout the region. The medicinal plants that Mourning Dove cultivated had become a valuable cash crop, with demand for her remedies extending far beyond the local area. Klaus Brenner, who had initially been skeptical about the unusual marriage, had become one of their strongest supporters and had even begun learning some traditional farming techniques from Mourning Dove's relatives. "I thought you were crazy when you married that Indian woman," he admitted to Zeke during a community harvest celebration. "But now I see that you were the smartest man in Oregon Territory. You found a wife who made you rich, happy, and respected by everyone who knows you." But beyond the practical benefits and social success, what struck visitors most about the Morrison household was the obvious love and respect that existed between Zeke and Mourning Dove. Their marriage had clearly grown from mutual admiration and shared values into the kind of deep partnership that sustained couples through decades of challenges and changes. Dr. Sarah Whitfield, a physician who had traveled from Portland to study Mourning Dove's use of traditional medicine, observed the couple during a week-long visit and was impressed by the harmony they had achieved. "I've seen many marriages in my professional practice," she told Mourning Dove, "but I've rarely seen a partnership where two people complement each other so perfectly while maintaining their individual strengths and identities." As the second anniversary of their wedding approached, Zeke and Mourning Dove found themselves planning a celebration that would bring together both communities to recognize not just their personal happiness, but the broader success of the cooperation their marriage had inspired. The celebration would feature traditional foods, music, and ceremonies from both cultures, creating an event that symbolized the cultural fusion that their union represented. 2 years ago, I was a lonely farmer who thought his life was over, Zeke reflected as they made plans for the anniversary celebration. Now I have a wife I love, a son who brings me joy every day, and a community that feels like family, all because I decided to help a stranger who was injured in the forest. And I was a woman without a husband, wondering if I would ever find someone who could appreciate both my traditional knowledge and my desire to learn new ways. Mourning Dove replied, "The spirits brought us together through Many Eagles' accident because they knew we could create something beautiful together." The anniversary celebration itself became a landmark event in Oregon Territory, attracting visitors from across the region who wanted to witness the remarkable community that had grown around the Morrison farm. Territorial Governor George Woods attended the ceremony and spoke about the importance of the example that Zeke and Mourning Dove had set for peaceful coexistence between different peoples. "What has been achieved here," Governor Woods told the assembled crowd, "demonstrates that the future of Oregon Territory lies not in conflict between communities, but in cooperation that allows everyone to benefit from the knowledge, skills, and perspectives that each group brings to our shared home." Udam. As the celebration continued into the evening with music, dancing, and storytelling that blended traditions from both cultures, Zeke and Mourning Dove slipped away from the crowd to walk quietly through the wheat fields where their love story had begun. In the distance, they could hear the sounds of laughter and celebration as their friends and neighbors from both communities enjoyed the fruits of the understanding that their marriage had helped create. "Do you ever regret the choice you made?" Zeke asked his wife as they paused to look back at the farmhouse glowing with lamplight and filled with the sounds of friendship and celebration. "Never," Mourning Dove replied without hesitation. "Everything that has happened since that day has proven that love and understanding are stronger than fear and prejudice. Our marriage has created ripples that will continue to spread long after we are gone." Rain. As they stood together in the moonlight, surrounded by the fields that had prospered under their joint care and listening to the sounds of two communities that had learned to celebrate together, Zeke and Mourning Dove understood that their love story had become something larger than either of them had imagined possible. Their marriage had proven that the greatest gifts often come in unexpected forms, and that sometimes the most important decisions we make are the ones that require us to see beyond our fears, to embrace the possibilities that love can create. The farmer who had saved an injured chief had received a gift from 5 women, but in choosing one of them as his wife, he had gained something far more valuable than he could have dreamed, a partnership that had transformed not just his own life, but the future of an entire region. The story of Zeke Morrison and Mourning Dove proves that sometimes the most extraordinary transformations begin with the simplest acts of human decency. What started as a farmer's instinctive response to help an injured stranger became a love story that bridged 2 worlds and created a legacy of understanding that lasted for generations. Today, the Morrison Farm is remembered as one of the first successful examples of cooperation between white settlers and Native Americans in the Pacific Northwest. The agricultural techniques that Zeke and Mourning Dove developed together are still used by farmers throughout Oregon, and their story has become a symbol of the power of love to overcome cultural barriers and build bridges between communities. But perhaps the most important lesson from their journey is this. When we choose compassion over fear, when we reach out to help others, regardless of their background or circumstances, we open ourselves to possibilities we never imagined. Zeke thought he was simply saving a man's life. Instead, he found a love that would define his future and create a model for peaceful coexistence that would inspire others for generations to come. If this incredible story of love, conquering fear and understanding bridging divides touched your heart, please hit that like button and share it with someone who needs to be reminded that our differences make us stronger when we choose cooperation over conflict. Subscribe for more amazing tales that prove the power of compassion to change the world. Don't forget to let us know in the comments which city you're watching from. Have you ever made a small act of kindness that led to something much bigger than you expected? Share your story in the comments below. Your experience might inspire someone else to choose courage and compassion when the moment calls for it.